Hey guys, welcome back to Blue Ridge Online. My name is Cami and this is Josh and we are your hosts.
If this is your first time back from Easter, welcome back. And we're really glad that you're here. And hopefully you're calling Blue Ridge home, specifically our Blue Ridge Online campus. We have some shout outs.
We have some shout outs.
Okay, so
I'm excited.
Our Easter service was last week and it was an amazing service. It was an awesome service that I'm really excited about because it's a whole experiential thing. And so shout outs from the Easter service, from some of the comments. We've got Scott B watching from Kansas after working last night. Thanks, Scott. Thanks for watching. Powerful service. Thank you and happy Resurrection Day to all of you from Susan Elizabeth Turner.
Absolutely happy Resurrection Day.
And thank you for watching. Thanks for joining us and thanks for being a part of our community, our family. Last comment shout out is from John T. Wonderful service. Thank you, Blue Ridge. Well, John, you're a wonderful man, so thank you. And special shout outs is Ashley watching from South Dakota, posted on Instagram. Thank you for joining us. And Ashley, congrats on getting engaged. David and Susie from New Jersey watching a new addition to our Blue Ridge family.
Check us out on Easter. Gonna start watching.
Yep.
It's so exciting.
And lastly, David from Chicago. Shout out to you. Thanks for joining us here in our little Lynchburg town
our
in Virginia.
Online community. We are so thankful for you guys. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments so that we can say hi. Send us an email, comms@blueridge.org. Introduce yourself. We'd love to get to know you a little bit.
It's so cool that our family is not just here in Lynchburg. It's all over the U.S. It's all over the world. Love to have each and every one of you a part of our community and family.
Now, if you did not watch our Easter service, it is obviously live for you. You guys can go back, you can watch it, and you can engage. There's some things that Jeremy is probing with, he's pushing us towards, asking you to pray into, and you can email any responses to that. I don't even want to give it away, to pastors@blueridge.org, and we'll be checking that regularly so that we can make some connections there as well. So we have some hashtag LYN stories.
You have a good hashtag LYN story.
I do, and I'm excited
Love your
about
neighbor
it.
story.
So when we say love your neighbor, it doesn't just have to be your actual neighbor, because our neighbor is everyone around us. But my actual neighbor showed us some love this past weekend. So we watched the Easter service online in Jersey. We visited family. And when we got back, there was this beautiful lily on our front porch. And we got a text from our neighbor and they said, happy Resurrection Day. We're thankful for you guys. And, just wanted to leave us a little gift. And it was so cool. We've been getting to know our neighbors over the past few months. And
it's a good way to be welcomed home.
I felt loved, yeah. So if you guys do have any LYN stories, we want to hear them. Send them our way. comms@blueridge.org. You can put them on social channels and tag us. There's so many ways to let us know.
Okay, so this week, we are continuing in our series, Turn Your Eyes. And throughout this service, if you hear a phrase, you hear a word, you hear something Jeremy says, just put that in quotes down in the comments. We would really love to hear what specific things stand out to you. And if you enjoy this service, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. And before we join Jeremy in the studio, we're first going to join our worship team and give God some praise and worship. So let's join the worship team.
comprehend the way you love us. It's unthinkable. Only heaven knows just how far you go to say you love us. Our Father, Creator, you hold our hearts together. There's no one higher than you. Redeemer, Defender, our great and mighty Savior. There's no one higher than you. You are always with us, gracious to forgive us. By your power we've been set free. And Lord, we stand amazed in your presence, astounded by your mercy and love. Our hands are lifted high in surrender. Your grace on me is always enough. And there is no one higher than our God. There is no one greater than you. So let my life forever praise the glory of your name. There is no one higher than you. You don't belittle our pain and our suffering. You comfort us in our greatest unraveling. Jesus, my Jesus, you are the dawn that is breaking within me. You are the sun that is rising around me. Jesus, my Jesus, it's extravagant. It doesn't make sense. We'll never comprehend the way you love us. It's unthinkable. Only heaven knows just how far you'd go to say you love us. It's extravagant. It doesn't make sense. We'll never comprehend the way you love us. It's unthinkable. Only heaven knows just how far you go to say you love us. Lord, there's no one higher than Jesus. There is no one higher, no one greater, no one like our God. There is none more able, Christ our Savior, great and glorious. There is no one higher, no one greater, no one like our God. There is none more able, Christ our Savior, great and glorious. There is no one higher, no one greater, no one like our God. There is none more able, Christ our Savior, great and glorious. It's extravagant. It doesn't make sense. We'll never comprehend the way you love us. It's unthinkable. Only heaven knows just how far you'd go to say you love us. It's extravagant. no conditions when you pull me close. No, I won't resist it.
A fact I believe most of us listening would agree with is this. It's impossible to have significant relationships with someone void of conflict. Correct? My guess is there are some of us listening right now who are sitting next to a person with whom there is conflict. I'm sure somewhere within our sphere of friendships, family, neighbors, work, there's relational whitewater. I would assume a lot of us could rewind over the last couple of weeks and find an argument or a disagreement with someone. Just a couple of weeks ago, Jan and I had one of our largest arguments in a good while over who would go to the store on a Saturday morning to get apples. I love ruining a good Saturday over the big things in life. For most of us listening, we can find some place in our lives where there is some sort of relational unrest. Why am I so sure about this? Because like I said, it's impossible to have a significant relationship with a person void of conflict. And here's the deal. The same is true of the church. You see, the church isn't a building or a place you go. And as we've often stated, the church is the people. A people where we build significant relationships as we go on mission with one another, reaching out to people who have yet to follow Jesus. As we serve alongside one another, as we open up ourselves and become vulnerable with one another, as we help and care for one another, as we enter into one another's homes and share meals and laughs together, as we wrestle through the Bible together, as we walk through a pandemic like we have this last year or an election year together. As we do these things, we will naturally build significant relationships with one another. And with those relationships come conflict. And I'm sure for those of us who have been a part of a church for any extended amount of time, we have seen and experienced conflict from within the church. And unfortunately, often what we have seen has left a bad taste in many of our mouths, especially in light of a command that Jesus gave his earliest followers. John records for us what Jesus says in John 13. He says this, "A new command I give you. Love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." As we've pointed out time and time again in the past, that Jesus didn't say, by your theology, people will know that you are my disciples. By your cool or trendy church services, by the jeans your pastors wear, by the type of music you sing, by the amount of Bible verses you read or memorize, or by the Christian language that you use. He said, how we love one another, how we love other disciples, other followers of Jesus will shout to the world whose we are. It's why one of our core values as a church is relationships. That being the church is more important than doing church, meaning how we relate to one another when things are good and when things are tough, when relationships are working well and when there's conflict. All of that is way more important than pulling off another church service or program within the church. Being the church is more important than doing church. So today, I want to turn our eyes towards a teaching of Jesus's that helps us navigate this question. If those outside the church will know us by our love for one another, how do we handle conflict that will arise between us in a way that fulfills this command of Jesus's? Now, if you're listening and you don't identify as a follower of Jesus, I want to say two quick things to you. One, today, as we turn towards how Jesus instructed his followers, his disciples to handle conflict, you will get to hear what his intent was, and not what, unfortunately, those of us who claim to follow Jesus often live out. Two, these principles that Jesus lays out can be adapted to be used in your life. It won't be hard to see that the way Jesus invites his followers to deal with conflict between one another is a really good way to move towards conflict in any quote unquote real world environment. So before we jump in, let's pray. Jesus, I thank you the fact that we get to come together and we get to have these types of real conversations. And so I want to pray that we would be able to lay our pride, our opinions, our comfort level aside, and we would be able to receive as a church, as Blue Ridge Community Church, we would be able to receive what you have for us, your heart for how to deal with conflict between one another. And that through moving towards a healthier view of conflict, the world would take notice and people would see whose we are. It's in your name we pray, Jesus. Amen. Now, before we jump into our text, I want to say this principle through the years has been some of that secret sauce of success for Blue Ridge. Now, I'm not saying that there has never been anyone who's left Blue Ridge mad. That would just be a lie, especially in this last season. But this truth is something God has used to bring together a lot of different people who think very differently from one another, and allow us to serve alongside one another with a genuine affection for our differences. With that said, what we're going to talk about today is simple to understand, but is very hard to practice over and over again. So, if you have a Bible, would you open up to Matthew chapter 18? Now, where we're picking up is immediately after Jesus has just shared the parable of the lost sheep. If you're unfamiliar with what a parable is simply a story about the physical world that Jesus would use to illustrate a spiritual truth. So he just finished sharing this parable about a man who owned 100 sheep and one gets lost. So this man leaves the 99 to go after the one. Now, this is important for us to understand because this gives us a filter through which to read what Jesus is going to say next. It sets the tone for how important it is to Jesus to address something that isn't working correctly. It sets a mending or a restorative tone and filter to Jesus's following words. He says this in Matthew 18, verse 15. It says, "If your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault, between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother." So Jesus starts out and says, Jeremy, if you feel wronged, if you are offended by something that someone has said, if you had an interaction with a person that just felt icky, we've all had those icky interactions, right? Someone jumps all over us, says something that feels purposely hurtful, even though they mask it with a smile. Or they're sharp, they overreact. The list goes on and on. But it can all be summed up with this very deep spiritual term, icky. The interaction just feels icky. Jesus says, Jeremy, if you feel as though another follower of Jesus has sinned against you, if you've had an icky interaction, notice he's not making a suggestion here, but it's a command. He commands me to do what? To go and tell them their fault. So step one, when we experience the conflict that will arise between us and other Christ followers, is to do what? Go and tell. But within this first step is something that is super important. Read with me Jesus' words once again. Verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. This is often where the whole process falls apart right from the beginning, because within human nature is this desire to get others on our side, right? To feel affirmed in our offense, to hear from other people, you're right and they're wrong. Through the years, I've had followers of Jesus come to me asking, would I pray for them? And they'd say, I need to go and talk to so-and-so because and then they would fill in the blank of whatever the offense was. Or someone comes to me and says, hey, I need your advice. And then they go on to explain how they felt wronged by another Jesus follower. You see, often we go to one another under the guise of prayer and advice, when all we really want to do is gossip and hear the words, wow, that person really did treat you badly. They're the bad guy, you're the good guy. And we can come up with all sorts of reasons to justify this approach, but this isn't what Jesus said to do first. He said, step one, go and tell. See, when we talk to other people outside the situation before talking to the one who hurt us, we create a culture that's unsafe. We create a culture where people feel as though others are sharing their stuff, going behind their backs. And how many of us love those type of work environments, family dynamics, neighborhoods, or church families? When I go to you about how so-and-so hurt me because you care for me, now you look at that other person differently. There's now a barrier that has been erected between you and that other person that didn't need to exist. So step one, when conflict arises, before we do anything else, we go and tell. I've seen the power in this step time and time again. And I would say 90% of the time, when this is handled correctly with love, with a true desire to understand the other person, when done in humility, this is where the process most often ends. I've watched and experienced over and over again God work through this single step. I remember one time I was at a local Walmart with Jana early on, I believe it was a Saturday morning, when we ran into a Blue Ridger, and I could tell immediately that she was uncomfortable. She was in her comfy clothes and looked to be running into the store to get a few things real quick, not wanting to or planning on seeing anyone she knew. So sensing her discomfort, I just quickly said hi and moved on while Jana and her talked a little bit more. And in my mind, that was that. Well, a couple of days later, she was coming into the building at our new London campus as I was exiting, and she stopped me and said, Jeremy, can I talk to you about something for a moment? She went on to say very kindly how I had made her feel that day in Walmart. She said, Jeremy, it felt like you saw me and you couldn't wait to get away from me, that you just wanted to get on with what you were doing. She went on to explain she left feeling dismissed and ignored by one of her pastors. Now, let me just say, I was so glad she came to me, that she was willing to move past her own discomfort to share how our interaction had made her feel that day. Because honestly, I had no idea. And if she had not come and told me, I would have never known anything was awry. And she would have been reading future interactions of ours through that filter. And if she would have shared it with other people before coming to me first, they would have thought, man, that Jeremy, he's a jerk. And that's how these things often go. But instead, she came to me and told me how I had made her feel. And because of this, I was able to explain to her the look of mortification on her face when we ran into each other, and how uncomfortable I thought my presence was making her. And so I was trying to move on as quickly as possible because I thought she wanted me to leave, which She actually went on to say was exactly what she was feeling in the moment. And this confession on her part led to us having a big laugh together, and she has since used that one interaction to teach others how important it is to go and tell when we are offended, hurt, or feel wronged by another person. Now look at what Jesus says will often be the outcome of this first and single scary step. He says this: if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. Our relationship went deeper because she was willing to risk and open up about how I had made her feel. So let me ask you, if another follower of Jesus offends you, what do you do? Go ahead and say it out loud. You go and tell. If someone in the church hurts you, what do? You go and tell them. If another follower of Jesus wrongs you, what do? You go and tell them. If a disciple of Jesus sins against your best friend, what do? Trick question. They need to go and tell them, not you. Now, what if you risk and you go to them and you tell them that they hurt you and it blows up? It doesn't work. They take it wrong. They don't agree with you. They think you're the one that's wrong, that you're being overly sensitive. What happens is after you go to them, they just keep on doing the same thing over and over again. Well, Jesus wasn't finished. He says this in verse 16, but if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 brothers along with you. So if they don't listen, if the two of you can't agree, if they feel like you're wrong and yet you still feel like they're wrong, if you feel dismissed and not heard, if you leave and the conflict is still unresolved, only after having gone to them first alone do you then take step 2 and take 1 or 2 others. Why do we do this? He continues. He says this, but if he does not listen, take 1 or 2 others along with you, that every charge may be established by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. See, here's the deal. Conflict is one of those things that can be complicated by so many other factors. We know this. The way we communicate our hurt when our emotions are raw often isn't the healthiest. Having other people there can help filter and relate our hurt in a clearer and healthier way. Remember, just because you feel wrong doesn't mean you're necessarily right. Having someone there who's outside the situation can help us see our own culpability. It also gives the one we feel wronged by an opportunity to hear from someone other than the person who feels hurt. Now, let me be clear. What this step is not, it's not a gang up on someone session. Because of that, what I found when taking this step, it's helpful to take along someone who both people feel safe with. It's also helpful for the outside party to hear both perspectives at the same time. It can be really easy to have formed a biased opinion when coming into a situation knowing just one side. So I found that it's best just to wait and share what's going on with those 1 or 2 others when everyone is present. So, when there's conflict, Jesus says, step 1, we go and tell them. Step 2, if there's still conflict, take 1 or 2 others along with us. Step 3, we take it to the church. Now, let me say this. This is used only in case of emergencies. This step is like sitting in the emergency row of a plane and being told how to open the door if the plane goes down. You never want to have to do it, but it's there just in case. It's a last resort kind of thing. In my experience, if the first 2 steps are done well, rarely does conflict escalate to this point. But every now and again, a conflict within the church rises to a place where it's damaging the unity, the way others see and experience Jesus. It's painting a false picture of who Jesus is to the watching world. The evil one, Satan, is using that person and their unwillingness to seek forgiveness as a distraction. And they're becoming a person of division. And in those very rare cases, if they are in fact wrong and still won't listen, if the person remains adamant that they've done nothing wrong, even with multiple other followers of Jesus having gone to them and pointed out their fault in love and humility in a desire for restoration, then you break the emergency glass of this third step. Verse 17. If he refuses to listen, notice now, the increase in the hardness of the person's response. It's no longer that they will just not listen, but now they're refusing to respond, even though their sin is being clearly pointed out by multiple others. If their heart has reached this level of hardness, it says, if he refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean the entire church on a Sunday morning, but their community within the church. Again, I can't stress this enough, that the hope would be here that other Christ followers would be able to help them see how they are in fact wrong and have become hard-hearted at this point, giving this person every chance to change course. But unfortunately, sometimes people just don't. And so Jesus continues. He says, and if he refuses to listen even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. When the title Gentile and tax collector are used in the Bible, they're often used to describe those who are deliberately rebellious against God. So Jesus is saying there comes a point where a person who claims to be a follower of me can become so rebellious and hard-hearted because of their refusal to admit what they're engaged in or what they have done is actually sin. And when they reach this point, after having gone gently and with great patience through the first 3 steps, that after all of that, then he or she is to be excluded from the community of the church and thought of as an unbeliever. And unfortunately, in our history as a church, we've had to do this in the past. It's never fun. It's always painful. But even in the midst of this extreme step, the hope is restoration one day. The hope is that the person will feel the pain of their choices, humble themselves, and take the correct next step towards mending the broken relationships. So when conflict arises within the church, and it will, what do? We go and tell them. Remember, in humility and love. Step 2, we take 1 or 2 others with us. Remember, people you both trust. Step 3, we tell it to the church. Use in case of emergency. So here's a question I have. Who do you need to go and tell? Guys, this is so simple to understand, but so hard and uncomfortable to engage in time and time again. So why would we? Well, simply put, this is the gospel. The good news of Jesus. Every single one of us listening to this have sinned against God, living life the way we wanted to live life. So what did God do? He came to us in Jesus. He told us how we had rebelled, how our hearts had become hard against him. And he didn't just do this once. Jesus went around during his life sharing this over and over again. And in the midst of our rebellion against him, he pushed his own comfort aside and gave his life for us so that we could finally come to the end of ourselves, humbling our hearts and admitting our sin so we could be restored back into a right relationship with him. This is what Jesus modeled for us. And so he asked us, A new command I give you. Love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Jesus loved us this way, so we could extend that same type of love to others. Who, then, do you need to take step one with and go and tell?
Hey guys, this concept of making things right, I think has been like especially meaningful in my life. I mean, with you and me being worship leaders, I can remember going through this verse and it says, you know, make right before you bring your praise to the altar.
Yeah.
And I can remember Woody actually talking about, he said that he never wanted to be in a grocery store and then have to go to another aisle because he saw someone that he hadn't made something right with.
Yeah.
And it's been extremely meaningful and like very practical in my life because there have been instances in my life where God has very clearly made it known that I needed to address something or talk to someone that was really awkward and uncomfortable because like years had gone by since the last time that we had actually talked, seen each other, anything. And out of that, we're still friends to this day. It's like really cool. We're great friends. We made things right after years, and it
went well.
It went well, and out of that, I do have a lifelong friend.
Yeah. And even if it doesn't go well, because they don't always go well, because you're taking a step of obedience. And there was this bumper sticker that my church had growing up, and it said, do right and give the consequences to God. And I love that because that's what we're called into. We're called to be obedient and do what God calls us to do, and He is going to take care of the rest. And so even if those like icky conversations, they don't go well, they're still, when they see you, they're going to remember that you took the time to at least come to them.
You personally can, in that grocery store, at least make the eye contact, make the nod, because you know you've done right in the sight of God.
Exactly, and let go of everything else.
Yep.
So yeah, very cool.
Yep, that is cool.
So thank you guys so much for watching with us today. I'm sure that some of you already have maybe next steps in your mind of what you could be doing out of this service, but pray into it, even if you do, because God's going to lead you. Make the call.
Make the call. Yes. If He's nagging at your heart, you won't regret it.
Yes, absolutely. And as always, if you would like to give towards Blue Ridge, you can do that online, and we will see you guys next week.